Waiver wire winners for fantasy football on Halloween heading into week 9. Leonard Fournette is signing with the Bills, which makes you think he is immediately going to take on that goal line role with Damian Harris injured and Latavius Murray not doing much with it. Fournette has had 2 double-digit touchdown seasons, but he's more than just a goal line back. He had 73 catches last season, 69 the year prior, 76 back in 2019. He's been a top 12 running back in fantasy points per game in 5 out of 6 of his seasons played. Prior to week 8, Trey McBride was trending up. His snap percentage was up. The targets were up. He had a 62-yard receiving week. Zach Ertz hit the IR. Then in week 8, he caught 10 of 14 targets for 95 yards and a touchdown for 25.5 fantasy points. This guy had a huge pass-catching profile in college, and I think there's implications that he could be a top 10 fantasy tight end the rest of the year. Chuba Hubbard filled in for an injured Miles Sanders back in week 6, rushing 19 times for 88 yards and a touchdown, 16 fantasy points. Miles Sanders returned in week 8, but Hubbard still played 67% of the snaps. He was inefficient, but he had 17 touches in comparison to Miles Sanders' 2. Looking like the running back 1 for the Panthers right now. Roschon Johnson returned to action after missing time due to a concussion. He played 36% of the snaps in week 8, 9 touches versus Foreman's 10 and Darrington Evans' 7. Still think there's a good chance he takes over the Chicago backfield this year. Second-round Green Bay selection, Jaden Reed has had back-to-back double-digit scoring fantasy weeks. He scored a touchdown in week 7. He had a season-high 83 receiving yards in week 8 with 6 targets. He's just simply trending up. Joshua Palmer aggravated that knee injury in week 8, so that meant first-round selection. Quentin Johnston caught 5 of 6 targets for 50 yards, all season highs. He's a first-round draft capital wide receiver attached to Justin Herbert in the wide receiver 2 role if Joshua Palmer misses time. Right before the Week 7 bye, Devin Singletary played a season-high 54% of the snaps, and he split touches evenly with Dameon Pierce. In Week 8, Dameon Pierce totaled 12 touches and 46 scrimmage yards. Singletary, 12 touches and 43 scrimmage yards. Pierce has been highly inefficient this season. Devin Singletary is starting to split work. It's either going to be a true committee or there's a chance that he might become the 1A. Brandon Cooks has had back-to-back games with a touchdown, which has led to 15 and 14.2 fantasy point weeks. Season-high 49 yards in Week 8 isn't phenomenal by any means, but it's a trend in the right direction with Dak Prescott stepping up. If you want to throw a dart on some high upside, look at Rashid Shaheed. He caught all 3 targets for 153 receiving yards and a touchdown in Week 8 for 24.3 fantasy points. Shaheed had 6 and 8 targets in the 2 games prior. He scored 19 fantasy points Week 1, 18.3 in Week 6. He might be boom or bust, but we love boom in fantasy football, and he can deliver that. No player in the NFL has a unique role in the way that Taysom Hill does with that fantasy football tight end eligibility. 1 catch for 14 yards. He also had 9 carries for 63 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns, 22.46 fantasy points in Week 8. Week 7, he had 50 receiving yards and a rushing touchdown for 16.8 points, 49 receiving yards back in Week 6. There's going to be weeks he probably flops, but he seems like a cheat code at the tight end position. The Patriots this year selected Demario Douglas in the 6th round, and his usage has been trending up for them. He caught 4 of his 6 targets in Week 6 for 54 yards. He caught 5 of his 7 targets for just 25 yards, but still good targets, good receptions. In Week 8, he led the team in both targets and receptions this past week. And unfortunately, Kendrick Bourne, who was looking like the wide receiver 1, just tore his ACL. Zach Charbonnet carried the ball 5 times for 53 yards. He caught 2 passes. He played 59% of the snaps in comparison to Kenneth Walker III's 41%. Walker had 9 touches. Walker might have been battling a calf injury, which could have had an impact, but Charbonnet is establishing some sort of a role and at least is a handcuff. Seattle did select this guy in the 2nd round. Week 8 was a massive debut for Will Levis. He threw 19 for 29 for 238 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. Now, will this be consistent? I don't know about that, but you might want to take a shot if you're hurting at the quarterback position. He looked great. Sam Howell simply should not be a waiver wire quarterback at this point. QB1 in Week 8, QB8 in Week 6, QB5 in Week 5, QB11 in Week 1. Season-high 397 passing yards and season-high 4 passing touchdowns in Week 8. 388 passing yards back in week 5, 3 passing touchdowns in week 6, 40 rushing yards in week 4. At this point, just stop streaming this guy and have him on your roster. Same team, Jahan Dotson, he had 8 targets in week 7, which was a sign for better days to come. And then in week 8, he caught 8 of his 10 targets for 108 receiving yards and a touchdown, 24.8 fantasy points. This guy missed time as a rookie, but still had 5 weeks of 16-plus fantasy points last season. Pick up and stash Tyjae Spears. Tennessee keeps him involved. He's had 5 weeks of 52+% of the snaps. He's consistently involved in the passing game. He would be the Derrick Henry handcuff if there ever was, knock on wood, it doesn't happen, but an injury or if he's traded. I know they said they wouldn't do it, but football teams surprise us all the time. Amari DiMercato rushed the ball 20 times for 78 yards. Weeks 5, 7, and 8, he played at 77%, 80%, and 55% of the snaps. DiMercato has simply operated as the team's lead back with James Conner out of the mix. Another commander here, but Logan Thomas. He caught 6 passes for 44 yards and a touchdown on 8 targets in week 8 for 16.4 fantasy points. It was his 3rd touchdown of the year. He scored 20.7 fantasy points back in week 5, where he caught 9 passes for 77 yards and a touchdown. 3rd week of 8-plus targets. He is important to his offense. Khalil Shakir played a season-high 65% of the snaps. He caught all 6 targets for 92 yards, 15.2 fantasy points. I know it was Shakir's first big week, but if he can carve out a significant role in a Josh Allen-led offense, this can translate to fantasy football. Tyler Boyd has scored 13.6 and 16.8 fantasy points the last 2 weeks. He scored a touchdown in week 8. Weeks 2 through 6, he earned 7-plus targets for those 5 straight games. I know he's the team's wide receiver 3, but he delivers some flex value and has had fantasy football relevance in the past. Follow us at Fantrax for consistent fantasy football content.